So here's my application pod, and I know that it is going through something called CrashLoopBackoff. But what is CrashLoopBackoff exactly in Kubernetes? When you have a pod running in your cluster and the pod crashes, by default, Kubernetes behavior is that it will try to restart the pod. This is to maintain high availability of your application, right? This is controlled by something called the restart policy of the pod, which by default is always, meaning when your pod crashes, Kubernetes will try to restart it. But what if the pod keeps crashing over and over? For example, you just made a new deployment to your code, but the code was buggy. So this code throws an exception during initialization. So now whenever your pod starts, the code throws an exception, and because of that, the container exits and the pod exits. This results in you being stuck in sort of a loop where your pod comes up, then pod goes through some issues, and then it crashes, and then Kubernetes will restart it, and then the same cycle repeats over and over. Now, Kubernetes doesn't immediately try to restart your pod always, right? In fact, with every crash, Kubernetes will wait slightly longer amount of time before it restarts your pod yet again. And this is called the backoff time. So for example, the first time your pod crashes, maybe after 2 seconds, Kubernetes restarts. Next time it crashes, it'll wait for 10 seconds and then restart. Next time it'll be 1 minute. Next time it'll be 5 minutes and so on, right? So this backoff time keeps increasing because Kubernetes is trying to give you more time to fix this issue. And since this backoff time is happening in sort of a loop where your pod starts and then crashes and then restarts, this whole thing is called a crash loop backoff. Now, the important thing is that crash loop backoff by itself is not an error. But when it happens, it usually indicates that there is some other underlying issue with your pod because of which it's constantly crashing. So you need to fix that underlying issue. So here in our case, maybe that was the faulty code. And so you need to now go and fix that faulty code, after which we will exit this whole loop because the next time the pod gets started, it will remain in the started state. And so we'll get rid of the crash loop backoff.